Welcome to part two on my thread of the importance of freedom of speech and freedom of thought and just freedom generally. There is a lady on Twitter called Carolyn Brzoski, who is a retired elementary school teacher, links as usual in the Dubras, who has written an extraordinary thread on the 5th of May 23, which I wanted to share with you. And I have therefore put the links where they need to be, as usual, but I would urge you to read it. Carolyn is from Canada, and it tells a story that more of us could do with hearing. So here we go, all right? Carolyn begins. I just listened to a local immigrant dad explain why he is concerned about his children's education. This is his story about how his former government used propaganda, fear of job loss, and social counselling to gain control over people. State-funded media became the only source of information. The first generation saw through the propaganda. They conformed when in public and only said what they really thought in hushed tones in their homes. The state indoctrinated the children to love the communist regime. From a young age, children chanted political slogans, waved flags, and marched in celebration. By the time their mandatory 2 years of military service was expected of them at age 18, the youth did not rebel. The regime could also draft anyone at any time. No one protested because that would be treason, the penalty, death, or the gulag. And the family would not be given jobs. The state owned all the land, industries, and housing. Wages and prices were controlled by the state. The bureaucracy was huge, and the more it grew, the more ineffective it becomes. The government would then give you a free apartment based on what you deserve. Brackets, how you cooperated, close brackets. Grandma was born in 1924 and hated the regime. Her parents had lost everything and were killed. But Grandma did not educate her own daughter in critical thinking since she was afraid of losing it all. So the daughter, this man's mother she's talking about, loved the regime. This new generation didn't understand where they had come from or what had happened in their country's history. The adults' fear of the consequences of speaking up and the government's indoctrination of the school children led to a 180-degree flip in views within one generation. This dad said, now come back to the present here in Canada. Just think about it. You have children who are a clean sheet of paper without any experience. Imagine what one could do for better or for worse. He concluded, when there is nobody to criticise or question, when all non-conforming views are heavily silenced, when there is no widely available non-state media, change happens quickly. We, immigrants, know this firsthand. Caroline continues then, the lesson I have learned from him is this. Be humble, Canada. Don't think that this can't happen to us. Be honest, say what you really think. Be brave, sacrifice what you can for the future of the children. Above all, teach your children to think critically. Now is the time to act. This thread resonated with me particularly because it speaks truth, and because other people that I've spoken to outside of the UK who have recognised the dangers of totalitarian and authoritarian thinking and have seen what it has done to their families, to their friends, to their children, to their loved ones, to the institutions that have brought us so far, when you allow ideological, mantra-driven, collectivist extremism to call the shots. And I know it's really hard, and I know it's really difficult, but the only antidote to collective ideological fervour is individual, collaborative endeavour. I am pleased this week to have received messages from a number of young men some of whom I've never met before, in their late 20s and early 30s, so a generation below mine, at least one, who have asked if they can meet with me to ask questions about what is going so terribly wrong. Why has this become so toxic, and why is this so dangerous to gay men and women and children, and in fact all of us? They want to understand how they have come to be duped into believing the propaganda of not just the LGBTQ hands, knees and bumps to daisy people, but of the critical race theorists, of the environmental extremists, of those who would scare, produce fear, who think that the human race are unworthy, who think that there is some reason why we shouldn't continue with our successful journey through time. Those who wish to break apart that which has provided some of us with the most extraordinary luxury, a luxury that we hope to export around the world, a way of living that is an absolute miracle in comparison to how we lived 200 years ago. Each of us has a responsibility to the other. Each of us has a responsibility to speak. It does not matter what your small act of resistance may be. It could be a sticker. They seem popular. It could be a letter. It could be an email. It could be simply saying no. But we have to ask ourselves a very important question. And for me, that question hinges on this. At what point do the perceived benefits of speaking out become greater than the perceived comfort of not? What does it take for you personally? What's it going to take? Where's the line? They're transing toddlers. They've sterilised kids. They're splitting people into racial groups. They're telling people not to breed because humans are a plague. Doom-mongering, doom-saying, frightening children, indoctrinating them in schools. All from filthy academic ideas where the academics should have strangled them at birth but didn't and let us down despite the trust that we had placed in them. Using the tools of propaganda from way back when, in the early eugenics movement in America. Right the way through the failed experiments of vile doctors in the 1950s and 60s who coined themselves the term sexologist, mutilated more children, through to where we are now, going into schools and telling kids that it's a good idea if you explain to teacher whether or not you prefer anal play or vaginal play. So I ask you today, where's the line you draw? Where? At what point will you draw that line? And each of us must make that decision. No more. We're done. At what point do you draw that line? And it better be before a line is drawn that you are unable to get past, that we can't go back to live like we do, the world we live in, because we've given too much and they've taken too much to be stopped. The police, the civil service, the schools, the universities, organisations around the world. At what point are you going to say no? And I imagine that point is going to be when you finally look up and see the vista before us and realise that crackpot conspiracy tinheads like me, which is how many of you will think I am, may not be as wrong as you thought we were. Have a thunk, people. It's worth it.